Supreme Court. This is the wrong time to be choosing a Supreme Court justice, and Justice Barrett is the wrong candidate for a seat on that court. The timing of tonight's confirmation vote is shocking. The majority of Americans want to be able to weigh in on who should sit in Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the highest court in the land. They want to vote to choose a president to fill that vacancy. We are 8 days away from Americans casting the final votes in the 2020 election. Over 58 million Americans have already voted, including more than 649,000 Nevadans. The American people are making their voices heard in response to this administration's disastrous handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which has led to the loss of 225,000 American lives, including 1,748 Nevadans, and sickened over 95,000 Nevadans. In the middle of this crisis, Congress should be doing everything it can to address the needs of the American people. Instead, the Senate Majority Leader is ramming through a nominee at breakneck pace. He and the President are rushing this nominee's confirmation for a reason, because they believe, based on Judge Barrett's own public statements, that she will be the decisive vote to overturn the Affordable Care Act in a case that will be heard just a week after the election. On November 10th, the Supreme Court will listen to arguments from lawyers in a court case about whether the Affordable Care Act is constitutional. Majority Leader McConnell and the President want a justice who shares their views on the Affordable Care Act seated on the court by that date. Amy Coney Barrett's record on the ACA, not to mention her stance on the rights for women and LGBTQ Americans that you've heard from my colleagues today and you will hear throughout the night. But her record on the ACA poses tremendous risk to Nevadans at a time when they need every help we can extend to them during this health pandemic. That's why I opposed her nomination to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals back in 2017. And that's why I oppose her confirmation to the Supreme Court today. Instead of rushing her through in a partisan fashion to a lifetime seat on the Supreme Court, we should be working together to get the additional coronavirus relief that Nevadans and Americans so badly need right now. Most of us here in the Senate understand that the American people need help to cope with the pandemic, to save lives and to stop the spread of the virus. People have to wear masks. They wash their hands and they socially distance. That's meant that businesses haven't been able to operate as usual. Some companies have been able to rethink their business models and thrive, but others just can't substitute online interactions for in-person contact. That includes Nevada's world-class travel, tourism, and hospitality industry. During April, Nevada had the highest unemployment rate ever recorded anywhere in the country at 30%. We're recovering from that peak more slowly than other states, and we still have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. In August, second only to Hawaii's, it was 12.6%. Nevadans are hurting. Nevadans are hurting, Americans are hurting. My constituents tell me about it all the time, and the data is clear, what I see in Nevada. 1 in 7 Nevadans say they aren't getting enough to eat. And 1 in 5 Nevadans say the children in their household are underfed. There's been a 14% increase in those receiving SNAP benefits in the Silver State since February. 14% of Nevadans say they are behind on rent or mortgage, and 38% are having difficulty with household expenses. 110,000 households in my home state could be at risk of eviction by January. That's why I have spent weeks calling on Leader McConnell to extend and expand upon the support that we put in place in the relief legislation that we passed in the first half of this year. Unfortunately, instead of negotiating another COVID relief package, Leader McConnell would rather play politics. Nevadans need to understand the partisan political games that are being played right now. Over the last 7 months, Senator McConnell has refused to come to the table to even negotiate with the administration, with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer. Now, Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader Schumer originally asked for $3.4 trillion in a new stimulus package. They've since come down to a request for $2.2 trillion in relief. That's a decrease of $1 trillion from their original position. And in return, as they've been negotiating with the administration, President Trump and Secretary Mnuchin have offered $1.8 trillion in coronavirus relief. Clearly, Speaker Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin have been working to get closer to an agreement over the amount and structure of the next needed comprehensive COVID relief stimulus package. Meanwhile, while that negotiation is going on, Senator McConnell's not even at the table. He refuses to even negotiate with the Democrats. Just last week, he has forced 2 votes on the floor of the Senate on relief packages that were crafted behind closed doors with no bipartisan negotiation. And the second package was half the price of the one before. That's not a negotiation. That's politics. Senator McConnell doesn't want a deal. He hasn't participated in the talks, and he's proposing less than a third of what even the Secretary of the Treasury thinks we need. Instead, the majority leader has been laser focused on one thing and one thing only: rushing through the Supreme Court nomination for Judge Amy Coney Barrett. There's a reason he is pushing so hard. He and others in the GOP have been obsessed with getting rid of the Affordable Care Act since it passed. And in Amy Coney Barrett, they see their chance to finally do just that. Now, I want Nevadans to understand exactly what's at stake and how we got here. Let me lay out the timeline of just some of the dozens of Republican attacks on the Affordable Care Act and how Judge Barrett fits into their larger plan to overturn health care protections. In 2010, the Obama administration passed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, the ACA, to bring down health care costs and make sure that Americans had access to quality health care. Now, Republicans have been trying to repeal it ever since, voting at least 70 times to undo the law in Congress. And when they fail in Congress, they attempt it in the courts. Republicans have repeatedly used the courts to challenge Congress's power to enact the ACA. Their first attempt ended in failure in 2012, when the United States Supreme Court upheld the important provisions of the ACA in an opinion written by Chief Justice Roberts in the landmark case NFIB versus Sebelius. But that has not stopped the Republican leadership, even though a majority of the American people have made it clear over and over that they want the ACA and its extensive protections for health care. This administration and Mitch McConnell have been stacking the court with federal judges they believe would overturn the ACA. And Professor Barrett fits their profile. In 2017, Professor Amy Coney Barrett wrote a book review article for Notre Dame Law School, making it clear at the time in that book review that she thought Justice Roberts incorrectly decided NFIB versus Sebelius. She said that Chief Justice John Roberts, and I quote, pushed the Affordable Care Act beyond its plausible meaning to save the statute. And conservatives who agreed with her, well, they took notice, because in May of that same year, in 2017, they nominated her to serve as a judge on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. Go from a professor to a judge of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, while her nomination was pending in 2017, in July, the Republican leaders in the Senate again tried to force a vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And during that vote, the late Senator John McCain gave his famous thumbs down to show that he would not be responsible for repealing the ACA and ripping health care away from millions of Americans. Well, a couple months later, October 2017, Amy Coney Barrett was appointed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. I opposed her then for the same reasons that I oppose her nomination today. 1 month later, in November, she is then placed on President Trump's list of potential nominees to the United States Supreme Court. She just got to the Circuit Court. A month later, she's now on President Trump's list. And why is she on that list? Because she made it very clear in her writings that she was opposed to the Affordable Care Act. And then 3 months later, in December of 2017, the Republicans in Congress passed a bill that would continue their attempts to sabotage the ACA. What they couldn't get done, because Senator John McCain and several others stopped him, they continued to sabotage it. So they passed a law. And based on this new law, several Republican attorneys general then went to court asking the court to rule the ACA unconstitutional. That case is California versus Texas. And it will be argued this year, November 10th, just 2 weeks from now. So their pathway has been consistent. I give them credit for that. The Republicans have been consistent in wanting to do away with the Affordable Care Act. They've either tried it here in Congress or they're continuing to work the courts. And if they can't win in courts, then let's put judges on the federal benches that we know will support our position. And that's what you have happening. That's why this is being rushed through now, because they need Amy Coney Barrett on the bench when that case is heard November 10th to determine the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. And let me tell you, the U.S. Department of Justice has done everything it can to assist their efforts to strike down the ACA. They filed a brief. The U.S. Department of Justice, on behalf of the Department of Administration, President Trump's administration, have filed a brief arguing that the entire law is invalid in support of those Republican attorneys general who want to do away with the Affordable Care Act. They've done this because the president wants them to. In an interview with 60 Minutes that aired just this evening, the president said that with regard to the Supreme Court's decision on the Affordable Care Act, quote, "I hope that they end it." And that's not the only time. It's not a secret. President Trump wants to do away with health care coverage and patient protections in the middle of a pandemic that has killed 225,000 Americans. And he's been very clear about it. I mean, look back, June 26, 2015. If I win the presidency when he was a candidate, my judicial appointments will do the right thing, unlike Bush's appointee John Roberts on Obamacare. February 8th, 2016. I'm disappointed. This is President Trump. I am disappointed in Chief Justice Roberts because he gave us Obamacare. He had 2 chances to end Obamacare, and he should have ended it by every single measurement, and he didn't do it. So that was a disappointing one. May 7th, 2020. President Trump reiterated his position. We want to terminate health care under Obamacare, and Obamacare is a disaster. September 27th, 2020. Shortly after Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court, President Trump tweeted, Obamacare will be replaced with a much better and far cheaper alternative if it is terminated in the Supreme Court. Would be a big win for the USA. So 4 years at least while I've been here, Republicans have been trying to repeal it, and this administration has been promising a replacement for health care in this country if the Affordable Care Act is repealed, but we see no replacement. And we know that they've been putting judges on the federal courts that will do their bidding, or at least think that they will do their bidding. Now, let me give Judge Amy Coney Barrett credit, because here's the thing. As an attorney, I respect judges. And I'm always looking for a judge, a mainstream judge, who is going to weigh the evidence and the facts, look at the precedent, and make a decision that is on behalf of this country and the American people. So it is fair, though, without knowing her background, to judge which way she is going to rule if she has an inherent bias based on her writings. That's what we do all the time. What are her writings, whether it is in private life as a professor or as an attorney practicing law or as a judge in her written opinions? That's fair game. That will give us insight, because we can't see into somebody's mind and what they're thinking. That will give us insight on their legal analysis. And we know what she said at the hearing. There's 2 hearings, one's the Seventh Circuit and one United States Supreme Court. And I will say in her confirmation hearings, Judge Barrett has said, quote, "I am not hostile to the ACA at all." But this statement contradicts the things she said about the ACA before her nomination to the court. I believe now what I believed in 2017. Judge Barrett's writings show her to be clearly opposed to the ACA. And my view is that no one, not even a judge, should weaken those protections for health care in this country during a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. The Affordable Care Act, it's a crucial part of the nation's response to coronavirus. Without it, insurance companies would be able to charge more or even deny insurance to people with pre-existing conditions. That includes the more than 95,000 Nevadans who have had COVID-19 to date, because contracting that coronavirus is a pre-existing condition. It includes another 1.2 million Nevadans with other pre-existing conditions, from asthma to cystic fibrosis to depression. Without the ACA, insurance companies would also be able to consider pregnancy a pre-existing condition, as they used to. The 1.5 million women in Nevada could be charged more for their care than men. And lifetime and annual benefit caps could be reinstated. If the Affordable Care Act is repealed or found unconstitutional, insurance companies would be able to kick children off their parents' insurance before the age of 26. Across the country, without the ACA, more than 20 million people would lose their health coverage, and over 135 million Americans would lose protections for their pre-existing conditions. And if the Supreme Court eliminates the ACA, millions of newly uninsured people will be unable to afford coronavirus treatment. If you don't have insurance and you contract COVID-19, you are looking at tens of thousands of dollars in hospital bills. And let me tell you, this is especially alarming because COVID-19 has hit communities of color the hardest, including in my state. In Nevada, a third of our population are Latino, with another 10% of the population African American, 9% fastest growing Asian American Pacific Islander population in the country, 2% Native American. Among COVID-19 cases, however, these numbers are practically turned upside down. 45% of Nevada's COVID-19 cases are among Latinos, who make up 29% of the population. And 29% of the cases are among white Nevadans, who are 45% of the population. Nevadans of color are also overrepresented in the numbers of those who have lost their lives during this pandemic. In Nevada, 12% of those who have died of COVID-19 are African American, and another 12% are Asian American Pacific Islander. We also know from national data that COVID-19 has a particularly devastating effect on children of color. Of those under 21 who have been killed by the coronavirus, more than 75% have been Hispanic, Black, or Native American. In addition, the coronavirus pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on pregnant women of color and their babies. Nationwide, Latino mothers make up nearly half of the coronavirus cases among pregnant women, according to the CDC data through August. Young people and communities of color are also seeing the greatest economic impacts as a result of this pandemic. They're losing jobs and health care at higher rates. A recent study suggested that job losses would mean that 5 million Black, Latino, and Asian Americans would lose health care during the pandemic. People in these communities don't always have the financial reserves to keep a roof over their heads, let alone access critical physical and mental health care. Repealing the ACA would just further jeopardize these Americans, including millions in my home state and across this country. And without the ACA protections, women in Nevada would also see adverse impacts on their health. That's because the ACA requires insurance plans to offer women essential benefits like annual wellness exams, preventative mammograms, and other screenings, maternity care, and access to free birth control. If the law is struck down, these benefits would go too. In fact, Judge Barrett publicly signed a statement of protest against the ACA contraceptive coverage requirements. She said that those requirements were, quote, an assault on religious liberty when applied to religious employers and institutions. But that's just the first part of the danger that Judge Barrett represents to women's health. She puts reproductive health rights at risk across the board. In 2006, Judge Barrett signed a letter that called for, quote, an end to the barbaric legacy of Roe versus Wade. As a judge, she's repeatedly voted to rehear cases that struck down unconstitutional abortion restrictions. During her confirmation hearing, she refused to describe Roe versus Wade as a super precedent that could no longer be challenged. These views suggest, and her written views and comments suggest that, as she predicted in a 2016 speech, a Trump nominee to the Supreme Court would mean that the restrictions on abortion would change and that the court would likely increase how much freedom states have in regulating abortion. And if those states have more freedom to regulate abortion, it will lead to a patchwork of different laws in different states. A recent study suggests that if Roe versus Wade were overturned, the closest abortion clinic would close for 41% of women across the country. And the distance to the nearest clinic would increase from an average of 36 miles to an average of 280 miles. In 2020, American women shouldn't have to choose what state to live in based on what kind of health care they think that they can get. These are fundamental rights that shouldn't be up for grabs. More than 80% of Nevadans believe that women should control their own reproductive choices, and I stand with them. I'm also concerned about the impact that Judge Barrett would have on LGBTQ Nevadans if she is confirmed to the court. The ACA contains specific protections against discrimination based on gender identity. The Trump administration has already weakened these protections significantly. If the ACA is struck down altogether, people who don't conform to gender stereotypes, including transgender Americans, could face increased discrimination in health care. A study of transgender patients before the ACA went into effect found that 1 in 5 had experienced discrimination from doctors, and that 28% had postponed medical care in the past in order to try to avoid that discrimination. Judge Barrett could also pose a considerable threat to the LGBTQ individuals in other ways. During her confirmation hearings, she refused to say whether she agreed with the decision in Obergefell versus Hodges, which established the right to same-sex marriage nationally. In 2015, she publicly signed a letter stating that marriage is founded on the indissoluble commitment of a man and a woman. She has also publicly argued that Title IX of the Civil Rights Act does not apply to transgender Americans, noting that it seems to strain the text of the statute to say that Title IX demands that the government guarantee transgender bathroom access. So again, I am very concerned that if she's confirmed to the court, Judge Barrett will be an additional vote to strike down things like same-sex marriage and imperil the health of LGBTQ Nevadans. The truth is that Judge Barrett's views on a whole host of issues are far from mainstream. In her short time on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Barrett has sided with corporations over workers and consumers in a majority of business-related cases, resulting in the erosion of workers' rights and consumer protections rights. She has suggested that voting rights should be more easily restricted than the right to possess firearms. And she has ruled that the Age Discrimination in Employment Act does not protect job applicants from hiring practices that harm older Americans. Now, I have received over 18,000 letters from Nevadans opposing her confirmation. That is compared to 3,900 supporting it. So clearly, Nevadans are concerned that Judge Barrett doesn't share their views, and they're right to be concerned. The Supreme Court makes decisions about so many issues that affect our communities, and it will be lifelong. People in this country care deeply about issues, and in so many cases, Judge Barrett's views are out of step with what large majorities of Americans want. 77% of Americans think we should stop unlimited dark money from influencing our politics. But a 6-3 conservative court would slam the door on campaign finance reform, allowing corporations and other groups to throw their wealth behind their pet policies. Americans believe voting should be easy, safe, and secure, and that you shouldn't have to risk your health during a pandemic to cast your ballot. But again, a 6-3 conservative court, with Amy Coney Barrett on the bench, would make it harder for people to vote, especially people in low-income communities and communities of color. And again, bear in mind that we're in the middle of an election. If she's confirmed tonight, Justice Barrett will also be in a position to rule on any legal disputes about that election. And that's one of many topics that she simply refused to answer questions about during her confirmation hearings. Now, it's understandable for a judge to avoid questions about a case that may come before her so that she doesn't prejudge the outcome. But Judge Barrett refused to answer the most basic of questions that any high school civics student knows the answer to. She wouldn't say whether the Constitution allows Congress to protect the right to vote. Answer, it does, in at least 5 separate provisions. She wouldn't say whether the President of the United States can delay the election. Answer, he can't. That's not within his authority. She wouldn't say whether the President should peacefully transfer power to the winner of a presidential election. The most important American principle is that we, the people, get to decide who governs us. But Judge Barrett refused to even affirm that. And she wouldn't say whether voter intimidation or voting twice in an election is illegal. Well, it is. Those laws are clearly on the books. It doesn't take a constitutional scholar to interpret them. People in Nevada and across the nation need to realize that many of the rights protections they enjoy are one vote away from being ended by the Supreme Court. There are at least 120 landmark Supreme Court cases from the past several decades that were 5-4 decisions, with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg the deciding vote in the majority, and Justice Antonin Scalia, whose judicial philosophy inspires Judge Barrett, in the minority. There's every reason to think Judge Barrett would take positions like Justice Scalia's in those areas and more. With Amy Coney Barrett on the court, American civil rights, workers' rights, reproductive rights, health care, and yes, their voting rights are at risk. For all of these reasons, Judge Barrett is not only the wrong nominee, but she comes at the wrong time. Now is not the time to rush a nominee onto the court. Now, as millions fill out their ballots, is not the time to deprive the American people of a voice in choosing the next president who will choose the Supreme Court justice. Now is not the time for us to focus on the immediate crisis at hand. We need to act to save lives and to protect families in Nevada and across the country. We need that focus now on what our families are dealing with because of this pandemic. And that's why our focus should be on passing another comprehensive COVID-19 stimulus package. We need pandemic unemployment insurance for those who have been laid off or furloughed through no fault of their own, and subsidized health coverage for those workers. We need additional funds to address the health aspects of this pandemic, everything from PPE to COVID-19 testing and tracing to funding to develop vaccines and treatment. We need rental and homeowners assistance to keep people safe in their homes as winter approaches. Our small businesses need extended PPP so they can retain staff, and many of our large industries need support as well. State, local, and tribal governments must have assistance so they can afford to fund EMTs, police, firefighters, and healthcare providers, not to mention teachers who are reinventing education on the fly. All of these essential services are keeping our community safe and functioning during this crisis. Listen, I could keep going on and on with this list, or I could just simply point my colleagues to the HEROES Act, which the House passed months ago. If Senator McConnell really wanted to get meaningful relief passed, he would do it. We know he can move quickly because we can see that with this Supreme Court nominee. If he would just come to the table with senators from both parties who are eager to find a compromise to help out their constituents, and he could make that deal happen, that's what should happen. Instead, he and a majority of this chamber have decided to fast-track this nominee. They have decided that the most important thing they can do for the nation during a once-in-a-lifetime health crisis is to confirm a justice to the United States Supreme Court. The cruelty and blindness to the real needs of Americans is astounding to me. Instead of working together for our constituents, Republican leadership is focused on a last-minute power grab that threatens Americans' health. I can't support that. There is no reason to rush this nominee. There is every reason to act on a comprehensive COVID-19 relief package. It's what we should have been doing months ago. My priority is and will continue to be getting Nevadans the comprehensive and meaningful support that they need right now. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise